weight of her grief felt heavier. She returned to her chores, but now, even the simplest tasks felt like a mountain to climb. Nkechi's patience had wore thin, and Ijeoma's insult became more frequent. "You are so slow, Adamma," Ijeoma would say, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's no wonder your parents are gone. They must have been tired of you." Once upon a time, in the peaceful and flourishing village of Achala, surrounded by vast green fields and clear streams, there lived a beloved family. This family was led by Chief Okeke, a kind and wise man, and his gentle wife, Mama Adamma. Together, they were the pride of the village, known for their generosity, hard work, and the love they shared with everyone around them. Chief Okeke was a successful farmer, and his fields were always full of ripe crops. Mama Adamma was known for her delicious meals and the warmth she brought to their home. Their daughter, Adamma, was the light of their lives. She was a happy, playful girl with bright eyes that sparkled with curiosity. Adamma loved spending her days playing in the fields, listening to the songs of the birds, and helping her parents with small chores. In the evenings, she would sit by the fire with her parents, listening to the stories her father told about the great heroes and heroines of their land. Her favorite stories were about queens and princesses who were brave and kind, just like her mother. Life was good for Adamma and her parents. The villagers admired and respected Chief Okeke and Mama Adamma, and they often visited their home to seek advice or share a meal. The laughter and joy that filled their home were known throughout Achala, and everyone who visited left with a smile. But one fateful day, everything changed. A dark cloud of sorrow and fear descended upon the village when a strange illness began to spread. At first, it was just a few people who fell sick, but soon, the illness spread like wildfire. People began to cough and feel weak, and their energy drained away as if the very life was being pulled out of them. The village healer tried every herb and remedy he knew, but nothing seemed to work. The illness continued to spread, and the village was gripped by fear. Chief Okeke and Mama Adamma did everything they could to protect their daughter from the illness. They kept her indoors and made sure she ate well, hoping to keep her strong and healthy. But despite their efforts, the illness found its way into their home. Mama Adamma was the first to fall ill. One morning, as she was preparing breakfast, she suddenly felt dizzy and weak. Her hands trembled, and she had to sit down. Adamma noticed the change in her mother immediately. She ran to her side and held her hand. "Mama, are you okay?" Adamma asked, her voice filled with concern. Mama Adamma smiled weakly at her daughter. "I'm fine, Nwam. Just a little tired. I will be okay." But Mama Adamma was not okay. As the days passed, Her condition worsened. She became so weak that she could no longer get out of bed. Chief Okeke was beside himself with worry. He cared for her wife day and night, hoping and praying that she would recover. But no matter how much he cared for her, Mama Adamma grew weaker and weaker. Adamma watched helplessly as her mother's health declined. She wanted to help, to do something to make her mother better. But she was just a child. All she could do was sit by her mother's bedside, holding her hand and praying for her to get well. One evening, as the sun was setting and casting a golden glow over the village, Mama Adamma called her daughter to her side. Her voice was weak, but her eyes were filled with love. Adamma, Nwam, meaning my child. Mama Adamma whispered, "Come closer." Adamma climbed onto the bed and sat beside her mother, holding her hand tightly. "Mama, I'm here," she said, her voice trembling with fear. Mama Adamma smiled at her daughter, though her smile was tinged with sadness. "You are such a brave and kind girl, Adamma. Your father and I are so proud of you, but I need you to be even braver now. I may not be here much longer." Adamma's heart filled with fear and sorrow. "Mama, please don't say that. You are going to get better. You have to." Tears welled up in Mama Adamma's eyes as she stroked her daughter's hair. "Mwam, you must listen to me. Life is not always easy, but you must stay strong and always do what is right. Promise me, Mwam, that you will be brave no matter what happens." Adamma nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise, Mama. I'll be brave." Mama Adamma smiled, though it was clear that she was in great pain. "I love you, Adamma Nwam. Always remember that." With those words, Mama Adamma closed her eyes, and a peaceful stillness settled over her. Adamma felt her mother's hand grow limp in hers, and she knew deep down in her heart that her mother was gone. Chief Okeke was devastated by the loss of his beloved wife. He had been a strong man all his life, but the grief of losing Mama Adamma was too much for him to bear. He fell into a deep sadness, and not long after, he too fell sick. Adamma, now alone in the world, watched as her father's health declined. She did her best to care for him, just as he had cared for her mother. But she was only a child. She could not stop the illness from taking her father away as well. One cold morning, as the village was shrouded in mist, Chief Okeke took his last breath. The strong and wise man who had been the pillar of their family was no more. Adamma was now an orphan, alone in the world with no one to care for her. The villagers gathered to mourn the loss of Chief Okeke and Mama Adamma. They were loved and respected by all, and their passing left a deep wound in the hearts of the villagers. But no one felt the pain as deeply as Adamma. In just a few short days, her whole world had crumbled, leaving her alone and afraid. After the burial, Adamma stood by the graves of her parents, her heart heavy with grief. The rain continued to fall, as if the sky itself was weeping for her loss. She felt lost, like a small boat adrift in a vast ocean. The world that had once been so full of love and warmth now seemed cold and empty. Without her parent, Adamma had no one to care for her. She was just a child, too young to fend for herself, and the villagers were worried about what would become of her. It was then that Nkechi, her mother's younger sister, stepped forward. Soon after the funeral, a tall, stern-looking woman arrived in the village. Her name was Nkechi, Adamma's mother's younger sister. Nkechi had a commanding presence, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a wrapper tightly secured around her waist and a matching blouse, with a headscarf tied so tightly that not a single strand of hair was out of place. Her expression was hard, and she wasted no time with pleasantries. "Adamma," Nkechi called out, her voice firm and unyielding. "You are coming with me." Adamma, who had been staring at the fresh graves of her parents, turned to face her aunt. She had no words, only a deep sense of loss and confusion. Without hesitation, Nkechi took Adamma by the hand and led her away from the village that had been her home. Nkechi lived in a neighboring village called Umunze, a place unfamiliar to Adamma. She only had stories about Umunze. The journey there was long, and Adamma, with her small feet, struggled to keep up with her aunt's brisk pace. She stumbled several times, but Nkechi did not slow down or offer any words of comfort. By the time they arrived at Nkechi's house, Adamma was exhausted and scared. Nkechi's house was a large compound, surrounded by tall, imposing walls. The gates creaked as they opened, revealing a courtyard that was as cold and unwelcoming as Nkechi herself. The house was neatly kept, with everything in its place, but it lacked the warmth and love that Adamma had known in her parents' home. As soon as they entered, Nkechi called out to her daughter Ijeoma. "Ijeoma, come and see your cousin," Nkechi said. Ijeoma appeared from one of the inner rooms, dressed in a colorful, expensive dress. She was around the same age as Adamma, but the differences between them were stark. Ijeoma's eyes were filled with a mix of curiosity and disdain as she looked Adamma up and down. "So, this is the orphan," Ijeoma said, her tone dismissive. "Well, she doesn't look like much." Nkechi ignored her daughter's rudeness and turned to Adamma. "From now on, you will do all the chores in this house. Ijeoma has more important things to do than waste her time on such tasks. You will clean, you will cook, you will wash the clothes, you will fetch water, and you will also tend to the garden. Do you understand?" Adamma nodded silently, not daring to speak. She was too tired and too overwhelmed to protest. Her new life began the next day. From the first light of dawn, Nkechi's voice rang through the house, ordering Adamma to get up and start her chores. "Ngwa Adamma, get up. You must earn your keeps here," Nkechi would say. "There is no room for laziness in this house." Adamma worked from morning till night, her small hands scrubbing floors, washing clothes, and preparing meals. The work was hard, and Nkechi and Ijoma were never satisfied. If Adamma made a mistake, Nkechi's sharp tongue would lash out at her, and Ijoma would smile with satisfaction. Adamma, you didn't sweep the corners properly, Ijoma would say with a sneer. Are you trying to bring rats into this house? Nne, see how she burns the food. She doesn't even know how to cook properly, Ijoma would complain, her voice full of mockery. Adamma bore it all silently. The memory of her parents' loving faces was the only thing that kept her going. She missed them terribly, and each night, as she lay on the hard mat in the corner of the kitchen where she slept, she would close her eyes and remember the warmth of their embrace, the sound of their voices, and the stories they used to tell her. But the constant work, lack of proper food, and the harsh treatment soon began to take a toll on her health. Adamma grew thinner and weaker with each passing day. Her hands became rough and sore from the constant scrubbing, and her feet ached from standing for hours on end. The little food she was given was never enough to satisfy her hunger, and her clothes became worn and tattered. One particular hot afternoon, as Adamma was returning from the stream carrying a pot of water, her vision blurred, and she felt a sudden wave of dizziness. The world around her spun, and before she could steady herself, she collapsed to the ground. The pot slipping from her hands and shattering into pieces. Nkechi, who had been watching from the veranda, rushed over, but not to help. Adamma, she shouted, her voice filled with anger. Look at what you have done. Do you think pots are free? What do you think will replace this one? Eh? Get up and clean this mess right now. But Adamma could not get up. Her body was too weak, her strength completely drained. She lay there, trembling, as Nkechi's angry words washed over her. Ijoma stood by, her arms crossed, watching with a smile. I told you, Nne, she was useless. She said, she can't even carry a pot of water, ordinary pot though. Realizing that Adamma was too weak to move, Nkechi finally relented. Get up, you lazy girl, she muttered, dragging Adamma to her feet. You can rest today, but tomorrow you will work twice as hard to make up for this. Adamma was led back to her mat in the kitchen, where she collapsed, her body burning with fever. For days, she lay there, too sick to move. Nkechi, though angry, was not completely heartless. She gave Adamma some herbs to help with the fever, but there was little care beyond that. As Adamma lay on her mat, drifting in and out of sleep, she dreamed of her parents. In her dreams, they were with her, their faces full of concern and love. They held her hand, comforted her, and told her to be strong. Adamma, her mother's voice echoed in her dream. You are stronger than you know. You must hold on, my child. Slowly, after several days, the fever broke and Adamma began to recover. But the sickness had left her even weaker than before, and the weight of her grief felt heavier. She returned to her chores, but now, even the simplest tasks felt like a mountain to climb. Nkechi's patience had worn thin, and Ijeoma's insult became more frequent. "You are so slow, Adamma," Ijeoma would say, her voice dripping with disdain. "It's no wonder your parents are gone. They must have been tired of you." The words stung, but Adamma swallowed her pain, focusing on her work. She knew that she had nowhere else to go, and that as hard as life was with Nkechi, it was the only life she had. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Adamma's life was a constant circle of work, scolding, and exhaustion. There were moments when she wanted to give up, to let the sadness swallow her whole. But each time, she remembered her parents' last words to her. She remembered their love, their strength, and the values they had instilled in her. Mwam, her father's voice would echo in her memory. "You must always be strong and kind, no matter what life throws at you." And so, Adamma continued, clinging to the hope that one day her life might change for the better. But for now, she was trapped in a world of misery, with only her memories to keep her going. Years has passed quickly, and Adamma had grown into a beautiful young woman. One morning, as the first rays of the morning sun filtered through the small window of the kitchen where Adamma slept, the light danced on the rough mat that served as her bed, gently waking her from her slumber. Adamma stretched her aching limbs, feeling the familiar stiffness in her joints from the constant work she was made to do. With a deep sigh, she rose from her mat, ready to begin another long day. She moved quietly, so as not to wake Nkechi or Ijeoma. The house was silent, except for the soft chirping of birds outside. Adamma's first task was always to sweep the compound. She picked up the broom, its bristles worn and frayed, and began to sweep, starting from the front yard and making her way to the back. The broom's soft swish, swish sound was the only thing that broke the silence of the early morning. As she swept, Adamma's thoughts wandered. She missed her parents terribly, and often found herself thinking about the happier times when her mother would sing while they cooked together, or when her father would tell her stories of brave heroes and wise kings. But those days were gone, and now her life was filled with endless chores and harsh words. After sweeping, Adamma moved on to her next task, fetching water from the stream. The stream was a good distance away from Nkechi's house, and Adamma had made several trips each morning to fill the large pots in the kitchen. She picked up the heavy metal bucket and balanced it on her head, setting off on the familiar path to the stream. The path to the stream was narrow, winding through the thick bushes and past tall trees. The morning air was cool and fresh, and the sound of the rushing water grew louder as she approached. Adamma was always careful as she walked, watching out for slippery rocks and hidden roots that could trip her. As she neared the stream, she heard the sounds of voices. At first, she thought it might be some of the other village girls who also came to fetch water. But as she got closer, she realized the voices were coming from a group of girls standing near the water's edge. They were chatting animatedly, their voices filled with excitement. Curious, Adamma slowed her pace and listened closely. "Did you hear?" one of the girls said, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "Prince Uzo will be returning from Obodo Oyibo, which means abroad." "Yes, he will be coming back soon," another girl added. "And you know what? That means there will be a competition." "Ah, the competition!" a third girl exclaimed, clapping her hands in delight. "It's been so long since the last one. All the maidens in Umunze village will have to participate. I heard the prince will be settling down as soon as he arrives." Adamma's heart skipped a beat as she heard the word competition. She remembered her parents telling her stories about the grand competitions held in Umunze whenever a prince was ready to marry. The competition were legendary, with tests of beauty, intelligence, and character. The maiden who won would become the prince's wife and the future queen of the village. But what if he doesn't like any of the girls? One of the girls asked. "Ah, don't worry," another replied with a laugh. "The prince will surely find someone. After all, the competition will be open to all the maidens of Umunze. No one is left out." "Imagine being chosen by the prince," one of the girls sighed dreamily. "It would be like a dream come true for me." Adamma's mind was racing. A competition for the prince? And it was compulsory for all the maidens in the village. This could be her chance to escape the miserable life she had been living with Nkechi and Ijoma for so many years. As she filled her bucket with water, Adamma couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to participate in the competition. She had never seen the prince before, but from the story she heard about him, he had been studying abroad for so many years. The thought of possibly meeting him, let alone competing for his hand in marriage, seemed too incredible to be true. But then, doubt crept into her mind. What if Nkechi forbade her from participating? Adamma knew that Nkechi would do everything in her power to keep her from joining the competition. Ijoma would certainly be allowed to participate, and Nkechi would want all of Adamma's attention focused on the chores while Ijoma prepared for the competition. As she walked back home with the heavy bucket of water balanced on her head, Adamma's thoughts were a whirlwind of hope and fear. She had never dared to dream of anything beyond the walls of Nkechi's house. But now, for the first time in a long while, she felt a tiny spark of hope flickering inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this competition could be her way out. If all the maidens were required to participate, then perhaps Nkechi would have no choice but to let her join. And if she did join, maybe she could do well. After all, Adamma knew how to work hard, and she had learned many skills from her parents. She was also kind-hearted, and she believed that her parents' teachings would guide her in making the right choices. As she stepped into the compound, the familiar sight and sound of Nkechi's house greeted her. Ijoma was sitting on the veranda, lazily fanning herself and looking as though she has just woken up. Nkechi was inside, already barking orders for Adamma to hurry up with the water so she could start preparing breakfast. Adamma, why are you so slow, you this girl? Ijeoma called out, her voice sharp. Are you trying to make us all go hungry? Nne, see how lazy she is. Ijeoma, leave her. Nkechi's voice echoed from inside the house. She has a lot to do today. We don't have time for her nonsense. Adamma hurriedly set the bucket down and went to the kitchen to set the fire for cooking. But even as she walked, her mind kept returning to the conversation she had overheard at the stream. She wondered what the competition would be like and what tests they would have to pass. The thought of competing against so many other girls made her nervous, but at the same time, it also made her excited. If she could just get a chance, maybe she could prove herself. Maybe, just maybe, she could win. As the day wore on, Adamma's thoughts kept drifting back to the competition. She imagined herself standing in the grand palace, dressed in beautiful clothes, performing the tasks with grace and skill. She imagined the prince watching her, admiring her efforts, and choosing her as the winner. It was a dream that seemed impossible, but it was a dream nonetheless. When the chores were finally done for the day, and Nkechi and Ijeoma had retired to their rooms, Adamma lay down on her mat in the kitchen. She was exhausted, as always, but tonight, she had something new to think about. She whispered a prayer to her parents, asking them to watch over her and guide her through whatever was to come. Papa, Mama, she murmured, her voice barely audible. Please help me. I want to do well in the competition. I want to make you proud. With that, she closed her eyes, the tiny spark of hope still burning in her heart. For the first time in a long while, Adamma allowed herself to dream of a better future. One where she was no longer just the poor orphan girl living under Nkechi's roof, but a maiden of Umunze with a chance to change her life. And so, as the moon rose high in the sky, Adamma drifted off to sleep, her mind filled with thoughts of the upcoming competition and the possibilities it held. In her dreams, she was strong, brave and capable, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The competition was her chance, a chance to change her destiny. And no matter what happened, Adamma knew that she had to try. In the evening of the next day, the breeze rustled through the tall palm trees surrounding the royal palace of Umunze, carrying with it the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers. Inside the grand palace, King Obidike sat in his private chamber, his thoughts occupied with the upcoming event. The king's mind was heavy with the responsibilities that came with his position. But tonight, his thoughts were centered on one thing: the return of his son, Prince Ozo. As he sat in his large, intricately carved wooden chair, the king reached for his phone, his fingers brushing against the smooth surface. As he dialed his son's number, the phone rang twice before Prince Uzo's voice came through the speaker, clear and strong. Nnam, which means my father. Uzo greeted warmly. It's good to hear your voice, Nnam. And yours too, my son, the king replied, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. I trust all is well with you. Yes, Nnam, everything is fine, Uzo assured him. How are things at home? How is Umunze? Umunze is as it has always been, my son, the king said, his tone a mix of pride. The village thrives, but it eagerly awaits your return. The people have missed their prince. I have missed them too, Nnam, Uzo said sincerely, and I am looking forward to coming home. When do you need me back? The king hesitated for a moment, knowing that the next words would change the course of his son's life. I would like you to return as soon as possible. The competition to find you a wife is about to begin, and it is important that you are here. Uzo was silent for a moment, absorbing his father's words. He had known this day was coming, but now that it was here, the reality of it settled over him like a heavy cloak. I understand, Nnam. I will make arrangements to return as soon as possible. Good, the king said, relieved. But Uzo, there is something we must discuss before you come home. What is it, father? Uzo asked, his curiosity piqued. It's about the competition, the king began carefully. As you know, my son, it is a tradition in Umunze for the prince to choose his wife through a series of tests. The maidens of the village will compete in various challenges, and the one who proves herself worthy will become your bride. But Uzo, I want you to approach this with the seriousness it deserves. The woman you choose will be by your side for the rest of your life, as your partner and as the future queen. I understand that, Nnam, Uzo replied thoughtfully, and that is why I have a request. The king raised an eyebrow, intrigued. A request? What do you have in mind, Uzo? Father, Uzo began slowly, choosing his words with care. I want to participate in the competition, but not as the prince. I do not want the maidens to know who I am until after the competition is over. King Obidike was taken aback by his son's words. Not as a prince? Uzo, why would you want to hide your identity? Uzo took a deep breath before answering. Father, I have seen how people change when they know they are in the presence of royalty. They put on a show, saying and doing what they think will please the prince. But it's not always genuine. I want to see the true intentions of the maidens, to know who they really are. If they think I am just a palace servant, they will behave more naturally, and I will be able to make a better choice. The king considered his son's words carefully. He understood Uzo's concern, but he also saw the potential risks in such a plan. But Uzo, the king said, his voice laced with caution, deception is a dangerous game. What if things do not go as planned? What if the maidens find out the truth? I have thought about that, father, Uzo replied, and I believe this is the best way to find a woman who will love me for who I am, not just for my title. I want a wife who is kind, honest, and sincere, not someone who is just after the crown. The king sighed, rubbing his temple as he thought through his son's proposal. And how do you intend to conceal your identity? I have a plan for that as well, Uzo said confidently. When I return, I will take on the role of the palace chef. It is a position that will allow me to interact with the maidens without drawing too much attention. They will think I am just another servant, and I will be able to observe them closely. The palace chef? The king repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. Uzo, cooking is not an easy task. How will you manage? I have learned a few things during my time abroad, father. Uzo replied with a small chuckle, and I will have the real chefs to guide me. I only need to play the role convincingly enough to avoid suspicion. King Obidike couldn't help but smile at his son's determination. Uzo had always been resourceful and clever, and this plan was a testament to those qualities. And what's of your identity as the prince? The king asked. How will you explain your absence during the competition? Father, that is where my best friend Obina comes in, Uzo replied. Obina has agreed to help me. He will take on the role of the prince for the duration of the competition. He will be introduced to the maidens and the judges as the prince, while I remain in the background as the chef. The king was silent for a long moment, processing his son's words. It was an unconventional plan, but it had a certain brilliance to it. By hiding his identity, Uzo would be able to see the maidens for who they truly were without the influence of his title. And you are certain this is what you want to do? The king asked finally. There is no turning back once the competition begins. I am certain, Nnam, Uzo replied firmly. This is the only way I can be sure that the maiden I choose is sincere. I want a partner who will stand by me through thick and thin, not someone who is only interested in the crown. King Obidike nodded slowly, recognizing the determination in his son's voice. He could see that Uzo had made up his mind, and there was no dissuading him. With a deep breath, the king gave his consent. Very well, Nwam. If this is what you wish, then I will support you. But you must be careful. Deception can lead to unforeseen consequences, and you must be prepared for whatever comes your way. Thank you, Nnam, Uzo said, his voice filled with gratitude. I promise I will be cautious. The king leaned back in his chair, still pondering the implication of his son's plan. When do you plan to return, my son? Soon, father, Uzo replied. Good, the king said with a nod. We will make the necessary arrangements. The competition will begin in a few days, so you must be prepared. I'll be ready, Nnam, Uzo assured him. And father, thank you for understanding. Of course, my son, the king replied warmly. You have always been a wise and thoughtful young man. I trust you will make the right decision. After ending the call, Prince Uzo sat back in his chair, his mind buzzing with excitement and anticipation. He knew that the coming days would be challenging, but he was ready to face whatever came his way. The thought of disguising himself as the palace chef and observing the maidens without them knowing who he was filled him with a sense of purpose. This was his choice to find a true partner, someone who would love him for who he was, not for his title. Uzo reached out to his best friend Obina, who had been by his side through thick and thin. Obina was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a warm smile and an easygoing nature. When Uzo explained his plan, Obina listened intently, nodding in agreement. I see what you are trying to do, Uzo, Obina said thoughtfully, and I agree, it's a good plan. I will do my best in playing the role of the prince. But are you sure you want to go through with this? I am sure, Uzo replied confidently. This is the only way I can be certain about the maiden's true intentions. I trust you to play the role well, Obina. You have always been there for me, and I know I can count on you. Obina smiled, clapping Uzo on the shoulder. You can count on me, Uzo. I will make sure everything goes smoothly. But remember, you will be in the kitchen, so don't burn anything. Uzo laughed, feeling a sense of relief, with Obina by his side. He knew that the plan would work. The competition would soon begin, and Uzo was ready to find the woman who would share his life, not because of his title, but because of who he truly was. The day the news broke, it was as if a gust of wind had swept through the village of Umunze, carrying with it an electrifying buzz that crackled in the air like dry leaves scattered in the wind. The word spread quickly, leaping from house to house, from mouth to mouth, and by midday, the entire village was alive with chatter. Prince Uzo is returning, a market woman exclaimed, her voice rising above the clamor of the marketplace. She slapped her neighbor on the back, grinning widely. He's coming back to choose a wife, and the competition will soon begin. At the sound of her words, the women in the marketplace paused in their haggling. The children stopped their play, and even the elders, who rarely engaged in such excitement, looked up with curiosity. Is it true? One of the older women asked, her voice thick with skepticism. Or is this just another rumor? Ezioku, which means it's the truth. The market woman insisted, waving her hand dismissively. I heard it straight from the palace servant's mouth. The prince will be here any day now. As the news continued to spread, it was met with varying reactions. The young men of the village puffed out their chests and straightened their shoulders, hoping to impress the prince when he arrived. The elders spoke in hushed tones, reminiscing about the last time such an event had taken place and what it meant for the future of Umunze. But it was the maidens of the village who were mostly affected by the news. They giggled and whispered among themselves, each one secretly hoping that she would be the one to capture the prince's heart. The competition was not just an opportunity to win the prince's favor. It was a chance to secure a future, to bring honor to one's family, and to become a queen. The maidens continued their preparation, each one doing her best to enhance her natural beauty and charm. They wore their finest clothes, braided hair with intricate designs, and practiced their best smiles in front of their mirrors. The excitement was palpable, and for a brief moment, every maiden in Umunze dared to dream. Even in Auntie Nkechi's household, the excitement was impossible to ignore. Nkechi had heard the news from one of the neighbors and had immediately turned her attention to her daughter, Ijoma. Ijoma! Nkechi called out as she entered the house, her voice sharp with urgency. Come here at once. Ijoma, who had been sitting idly in the living room, quickly stood up and hurried to her mother's side. Yes, Nne, what is it? She asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and concern. Have you heard the news? Nkechi asked, her eyes narrowing as she studied her daughter. What news, Nne? Ijoma replied, a frown creasing her forehead. The prince of Umunze is coming back soon, Nkechi said, slowly, watching as her daughter's eyes widened with realization. And there will be a competition to choose his wife. Ijeoma gasped, her heart leaping with excitement. Really? Nne? A competition? Yes, Nkechi confirmed, a slight smile tugging at her lips. And you must prepare yourself. This is your chance, Ijeoma. You must do everything you can to win the prince's favor. I will, Mama, Ijeoma promised, her voice filled with determination. I will make sure the prince chooses me. Nkechi nodded approvingly, already formulating a plan in her mind. Good. We will start by getting you some new clothes. You must look your best at all times. The competition will not be easy, but I know you can do it. As Ijeoma and her mother began to discuss their preparations, Adamma stood quietly in the corner of the room, listening to their conversation. She had heard the news as well, and while a small part of her felt a flicker of hope, she knew that she had no chance of participating in the competition. Auntie Nkechi would never allow it. Adamma! Nkechi's voice snapped Adamma out of her thoughts. What are you standing there for? Go and fetch some water, you this silly girl. Yes, Auntie, Adamma replied softly, bowing her head as she hurried out of the house. As she made her way to the village stream, Adamma's thoughts were a whirlwind of emotions. She had always dreamed of a better life. One where she was free from the cruelty of her aunt and cousin. But she knew that such dreams were foolish. She was just a servant in her own home, and the competition was meant for the maidens of noble birth, not someone like her. Meanwhile, far from the village of Umunze, Prince Uzo and his best friend Obinna were making their final preparations for their return. The two young men had spent the past few days discussing their plan, refining every detail to ensure that nothing would go wrong. Are you sure about this, Uzo? Obinna asked, as he folded a shirt and placed it into his suitcase. Pretending to be someone else, it's kind of risky. I'm sure, Uzo replied, his tone firm. I need to know the true intentions of the maidens. I don't want someone who is only interested in my title or wealth. I want a wife who will love me for who I am, not for what I can give her. Obinna nodded, understanding his friend's reasoning. And you think pretending to be the palace chef will help you find that? Yes, Uzo said with a slight smile. As the palace chef, I'll be able to observe the maidens without them knowing who really I am. I will see how they treat those they believe are beneath them, and I will know who is truly kind-hearted. And what about me? Obinna asked with a grin. Are you sure I can pull off pretending to be a prince? You will do just fine, Uzo said, clapping his friend on the shoulder. Just remember to act confident and don't let anyone question your authority. The villagers won't suspect anything as long as we stick to the plan. Perhaps I was just a little boy when I left the village, so don't worry, no one knows me in person. With their bags packed and their plans set, the two friends boarded a plane bound for Nigeria, their hearts filled with anticipation for what lay ahead. As the plane touched down at the airport, Uzo and Obinna exchanged a knowing look. The next few weeks would be a test of their resolve, but they were ready for whatever challenges came their way. Back in Umunze, the palace was a hive of activity as preparations for the prince's return reached a fever pitch. The palace staff worked tirelessly, cleaning and decorating every corner of the grand estate. The walls were scrubbed until they shone, the floors polished a mirror-like finish, and fresh flowers were arranged in every room. The palace cooks were especially busy, preparing a feast that would rival any banquet held in the kingdom. Pots of soup simmered on the stove, the aroma of spices filling the air, while trays of jollof rice, roasted meat, and fresh fruit were carefully arranged on long tables. King Obidike oversaw the preparations with a watchful eye, making sure that everything was perfect for his son's return. He had always taken great pride in his palace, and he wanted to ensure that it was a place worthy of his son's homecoming. "Is everything ready?" the king asked one of the palace stewards as he walked through the grand hall. "Almost, Your Majesty," the steward replied with a bow. "The final touches are being made, and the guest rooms are being prepared for the prince and his friend." "Good," the king said with a nod. "Make sure the prince's chamber is especially comfortable. He has had a long journey and he will need his rest." As the preparation continued, the excitement in the palace grew. The guards stood a little straighter, the servants moved a little faster, and everyone was on high alert for the moment when the prince would return. But what none of them knew was that the man they were preparing for, the man they believed to be the prince, was not who he seemed. The real Prince Uzo would arrive not as the honored guest, but as a humble palace chef, hidden in plain sight. As afternoon drew closer, the anticipation in Umunze reached its peak. The villagers lined the street, eager to catch a glimpse of the royal procession. The maidens, dressed in their finest clothes, stood in groups, whispering excitedly and stealing glances at one another, each hoping to outshine the rest. In the midst of all this excitement, Auntie Nkechi and Ijoma prepared themselves for the competition. Nkechi had managed to borrow a beautiful dress for Ijoma, and she spent hours fusing over her daughter's appearance, making sure that every detail was perfect. "You must be perfect, Ijoma," Nkechi said as she adjusted the folds of the dress. "The prince must see that you are the most beautiful and deserving maiden in the village." "I will do my best, Nne," Ijoma replied, her voice filled with determination. She looked at her reflection in the small cracked mirror that hung on the wall, admiring the way the dress hugged her figure. The fabric shimmered in the light, and the colors complemented her smooth dark skin. She knew she looked beautiful, but deep down, a tiny seed of doubt gnawed at her. What if the other maidens were more beautiful? What if the prince didn't even notice her? But Nkechi would hear none of it. "Nwam, Chukwu ga-edugi," which means that God will lead her, she said, waving away Ijoma's unspoken fears. "You are the most beautiful maiden in Umunze. If the prince has eyes, he will see that." Adamma watched silently as Nkechi fussed over Ijoma, her heart heavy with a mixture of emotions. She wished she could be as excited as the other maidens, but she knew better than to hope for things that could never be. She knew her place, and it wasn't among the maidens vying for the prince's attention. With a sigh, she turned and went back to her chores, trying to push the excitement of the village from her mind. As the villagers prepared to welcome the prince, Prince Uzo and his friend Obinna were already on their way back to Umunze, their hearts filled with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. They had left the bustling city life behind, trading the luxury and comfort of their lives abroad for the simplicity of village life, at least for the time being. "We are almost there," Obinna said, glancing out of the window of the car they had rented. The road ahead was lined with tall trees, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. "Are you ready for this, Uzo?" Prince Uzo smiled, though there was a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. "I am," he replied, nodding. "I just hope the plan works. If the maidens know who I really am, they might act differently. I need to see them for who they truly are, not for who they think I am." "And that's why I am here," Obinna said with a grin. "I will play the part of the prince, and you can be the palace chef. No one will suspect a thing." The two friends laughed, their spirits lifting as they neared the village. They knew that the next few weeks would be a challenge, but they were ready for it. They were determined to find the one maiden who was worthy of being queen of Umunze. And they knew that the only way to do that was to test the heart of the maidens without revealing their true identities. As they entered the village, the streets were lined with people, their faces filled with excitement and curiosity. The villagers had heard of the prince's arrival, and they had all come out to greet him. They waved palm fronds and cheered as the car drove by, their voices rising in a joyful chorus. "No, no," which means "welcome, welcome," they shouted, their smiles wide and genuine. The excitement was palpable, and the air buzzed with energy as the villagers caught their first glimpse of the car that carried the prince. Inside the car, Obinna straightened his shoulders and took a deep breath. "Here we go," he muttered under his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He waved at the villagers through the window, trying his best to look regal and composed. Prince Uzo, who was sitting beside him, did the same, though with a little more ease. He knew that all eyes were on Obinna, and he could relax a bit, playing the part of the humble companion. As the car came to a stop in front of the palace gate, the villagers gathered around, their faces filled with admiration. The palace guards quickly moved to control the crowd, ensuring that the prince and his companion had enough space to exit the vehicle. The palace gate creaked open, revealing the grand estate that lay beyond. The villagers gasped in admiration as they caught the sight of the palace, its walls gleaming in the fading light of the setting sun. The air was filled with the sweet scent of flowers, and the sound of birds singing softly in the trees added to the magical atmosphere. Obinna stepped out of the car first, his heart racing as he felt the weight of the villagers' gazes on him. He smiled politely, trying to hide his nervousness. He knew that he had to play his part well. One misstep, and their plan would be ruined. Prince Uzo followed suit, stepping out of the car with a calm and composed demeanor. He knew that in the eyes of the villagers, he was just a common person, and intended to keep it that way. He glanced around, taking in the familiar sight and sounds of his home. As the two friends walked towards the palace entrance, the villagers bowed respectfully, their eyes filled with admiration. They whispered among themselves, speculating about the prince and his companion, each one eager to know more about the man who would soon choose a wife from among their daughters. King Obidike stood at the entrance of the palace, his heart swelling with pride as he watched the young men approach. He had always been proud of his son, and now, seeing him return after so many years, that pride was almost overwhelming. No, Nwam, welcome, my child, the king said, his voice warm and filled with affection as he embraced Obinna, who was pretending to be the prince. He then turned to Uzo, who bowed respectfully. Your Majesty, Uzo said, his voice steady and calm. Welcome home, both of you, the king said, beaming with pride. He then motioned for the palace guards to open the doors, allowing the two friends to enter the grand hall. As they walked through the palace, the staff bowed and curtsied, their faces filled with admiration and respect. None of them suspected that the real prince was among them, disguised as a humble companion. The king led them to the dining hall, where a feast had been prepared in their honor. The table was laden with all sorts of delicious dishes, from steaming pots of soup, to platters of roasted meat and fresh fruit, to trays of jollof rice. The aroma filled the air, making their mouths water. Please, sit, the king said, motioning to the seats at the head of the table. Obinna took his place at the head, while Uzo sat beside him, playing his part as the loyal companion. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, the king asking about their journey and their plans for the coming weeks. Obinna answered with confidence, keeping up the charade, while Uzo listened quietly, occasionally adding a word or two. After the meal, the king showed them to their chambers, making sure that everything was to their liking. I hope you find your rooms comfortable, he said with a smile. If there is anything you need, do not hesitate to ask. Thank you, Your Majesty, Obinna said, bowing respectfully. The king then bid them good night, leaving them to settle into their rooms. As soon as the door closed behind them, Obinna let out a sigh of relief, sinking into the plush bed. That was intense, he muttered, rubbing his temples. You did well, Uzo said with a grin, sitting down on the edge of the bed. No one suspected a thing. Obinna chuckled, though there was a hint of nervousness in his laughter. Let's hope it stays that way. The next morning, the village was once again alive with activity. The news of the prince's arrival had spread like wildfire, and the villagers were eager to catch another glimpse of the young man who would soon choose a wife from among their daughters. The maidens were especially excited, each one hoping that she would be the one to win the prince's heart. They spent hours in front of their mirrors, trying on different outfits and practicing their best smiles, each one determined to outshine the rest. But little did they know that the man they believed to be the prince was not who he seemed. As they prepared for the competition, the real prince watched from the shadows, his identity hidden behind the humble guise of a palace companion. As the day wore on, the villagers gathered in the town square, eager to greet the prince and his companion as they made their way to the market. The air was filled with excitement, the buzz of conversation and laughter echoing through the streets. When Obinna and Uzo finally appeared, the crowd erupted in cheers, the villagers waving and calling out greetings as the two friends made their way through the throng. Obinna smiled and waved, playing the part of the prince with ease, while Uzo walked beside him, his face calm and composed. The villagers continued to cheer and wave, their faces filled with admiration as they watched the two young men pass by. They had no idea that they were greeting the wrong man. their cheers and smiles directed at the one who was not the true prince. Finally, after what felt like hours, the crowd began to disperse, the villagers returning to their homes with smiles on their faces and excitement in their hearts. They had seen the prince, and they couldn't wait for the competition. The village of Umunze was buzzing with excitement as the much anticipated competition drew nearer. The maidens, each with dreams of becoming the prince's bride, were already deep in preparation. Every corner of the village seemed to echo with the sound of laughter, the swish of rappers, and the rhythm of drums. While some maidens were busily preparing, others were more relaxed. Ugochi, a tall and graceful maiden with deep brown eyes, sat quietly by herself, humming a soft tune. She wasn't one to stress over appearances or worry about what the other girls were doing. Instead, she believed that if the prince were destined to choose her, then it would happen naturally. Aren't you worried about the competition? A voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Amaka, a friend of hers, who had been watching from afar. Ugochi smiled. Not really, Amaka. What will be, will be. I can't change my fate, and worrying won't help. I will just be myself and see what happens. Amaka nodded thoughtfully, admiring Ugochi's calmness. It was true that the competition was on everyone's mind, but each maiden approached it in her own way. Some focused on dance, others on beauty, and a few like Ugochi trusted in fate. Meanwhile, in the grand palace, preparations of a different kind were underway. The halls echoed with the sounds of busy footsteps and hushed conversations, as the palace staff ensured that everything was in perfect order. The walls gleamed with freshly polished wood, and the scent of flowers filled the air, making the palace feel alive with anticipation. King Obidike, dressed in his royal attire, walked through the palace with a purposeful stride. His robe, adorned with intricate designs, billowed behind him as he was accompanied by members of the council, the Onowu, and the chiefs. The king's expression was serious as he spoke, and everyone listened intently to his words. The upcoming competition is a momentous event, the king began, his voice resonating with authority. It's not just about choosing a bride for the prince, but about selecting the future queen of Umunze. Every detail must be meticulously planned, and every decision must be made with care. The council nodded in agreement, their eyes reflecting the gravity of the occasion. They knew that this competition was not just a simple event, it was a turning point for the future of Umunze. I have given instructions for the recruitment of new palace staff, the king continued, his eyes scanning the room to ensure that everyone was paying attention. This includes additional palace chefs who will prepare meals for the maidens during their stay. We must ensure that they are well cared for and that their time here is both comfortable and memorable. One of the chiefs, an elderly man with a long white beard, spoke up. Your Majesty, have you selected the judges for the competition? Their role will be crucial in determining the outcome. King Obidike nodded thoughtfully. Yes, I have. The judges will be chosen from among most respected elders in the village, as well as the trusted advisors from the palace. They must be individuals of integrity and wisdom, capable of making fair and unbiased decisions. Their judgment will be final. As the king spoke, a young man entered the room, drawing the attention of everyone present. It was Obina, disguised as the prince, his demeanor calm and composed. He was dressed in a royal attire, his posture regal and commanding, but there was a warmth in his eyes that immediately put those around him at ease. "Your Highness," the king said with a welcoming smile, extending his hand to the young man, "allow me to introduce you to the members of the council, the Onowu, and the chiefs of Umunze. These are the men who will support you as you prepare for the competition." Obinna bowed respectfully, his voice steady as he spoke. "It's an honor to meet you all. I look forward to working together to ensure that this competition is a success." The council members and chiefs returned the bow, their expressions filled with respect. They had heard much about the prince's wisdom and leadership, and they were eager to see him fulfill his role in this important event. King Obidike gestured for Obinna to join them at the large table in the center of the room. "Please, Your Highness, sit with us. We are just discussing the details of the competition." As they took their seats, the king continued to outline the plans for the competition. The event will span several days, with each maiden given the opportunity to showcase their talent, skills, and character. The rounds will include dance, traditional skills, and personal interviews, where the judges will assess their qualities and suitability as a future queen. Prince Obinna listened carefully, absorbing every detail. Although he was playing the role of the prince, he knew that the real Prince Uzo's future and the future of Umunze depended on the success of this plan. The final round, the king said, his tone growing more serious, will be the most critical. The maidens would be given a task that tests their patience, kindness, and problem-solving abilities. This will be their opportunity to demonstrate the qualities that made a true queen: wisdom, compassion, and strength of character. The room was silent as everyone considered the weight of the king's words. They all understood that this competition was about more than just beauty or skill. It was about finding the right person to lead alongside the prince, someone who would guide Umunze into a prosperous future. As the discussion continued, the king emphasized the importance of fairness and integrity. He wanted to ensure that every maiden had an equal chance to prove herself, and that the decision would be based solely on merit. Finally, as the meeting drew to a close, King Obidike rose from his seat. His expression was one of solemn determination. "We are about to embark on a journey that will shape the future of Umunze. Let us proceed with wisdom and honor, ensuring that every decision we make reflects our commitment to this great responsibility." The council members and chiefs nodded in agreement, their faces serious as they prepared to leave the room. The king's words echoed in their minds, reminding them of the significance of the task ahead. As the others began to file out of the room, the king turned to Obinna, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your Highness, I trust you will make the right choice. Remember, this is not just about finding a bride. It's about finding a partner who will rule by your side with wisdom and grace." Obinna nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibilities on his shoulders. "I understand, Your Majesty. I will do my best to fulfill my duty and make a choice that honors the future of Umunze." With the meeting concluded, the king stepped out into the courtyard, where the town crier was waiting. The town crier, a man with a powerful voice that could carry across the village, bowed deeply as the king approached. "Go to every corner of Umunze," the king instructed. "Announce to the people that they must prepare their daughters for the upcoming competition. In 2 market days, every maiden is expected to gather at the palace for the start of the event. Let no one be left uninformed. The town crier nodded, understanding the importance of his task. He picked up his gong and with a loud clang began his announcement. His voice rang out across the village, carrying the king's message to every home. Genuntio! Genuntio! The town crier cried out, capturing the attention of everyone, young and old alike. His gong clanged with each declaration, sending ripples of anticipation through the air. By order of King Obidike, let it be known that in 2 market days, a grand competition will begin at the palace. Every maiden of marriageable age is required to attend. Prepare your daughters, for the prince seek a bride. As he made his way from one end of the village to the other, the people of Umunze listened intently. Mothers hurried to their daughters, making sure they were ready for what was to come. Fathers, too, looked on with pride, hopeful that their daughters might have a chance to win the heart of the prince. Children followed the town crier as he walked, their eyes wide with curiosity. They whispered among themselves, excitedly sharing stories they had heard about the prince and his upcoming search for a bride. Some of the older girls began to dream, imagining what it would be like to be chosen, to wear the royal crown, and to live in the grand palace. In the fastest corners of the village, where the huts were fewer and the trees grew taller, the town criers reached even those who lived in seclusion. The news spread quickly, carried by word of mouth, until every family knew of the upcoming event. In the palace, King Obidike retired to his private chambers, his mind heavy with the responsibilities that lay ahead. He knew that the competition was only the beginning of a long journey, one that would shape the future of Umunze for generations to come. As he sat by the window, gazing out at the stars that dotted the night sky, the king's thoughts turned to his son, Prince Uzo. He hoped that Uzo would find not just a wife, but a partner, someone who would stand by his side through the challenges and triumphs of life. The king sighed, feeling the weight of his role as a father and a leader. He knew that the decision they were about to make would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Uzo, but for the entire village. Meanwhile, in a secluded corner of the palace, Obinna, who was playing the role of the prince, sat quietly, lost in thought. He had always been a loyal friend to Prince Uzo, and now he found himself in an unusual position, one that required him to be both conscious and wise. As he prepared for the days ahead, Obinna knew that the task before him was no small one. He would need to observe the maidens closely, understanding their true character, all while maintaining his disguise. It was a delicate balance, but one he was determined to uphold. As the night grew deeper, the palace grew quiet, with only the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. The preparations for the competition were in full swing, and every detail was being carefully attended to. The next 2 market days would determine everything, and in the quiet of night, the stars seemed to twinkle a little brighter, as if they too were watching, waiting to see what the dawn would bring.